Okay, welcome back everyone to this first series of tutorial that looks into Slice Up for free functionalities. So in the previous tutorial we created a base and now we're gonna go on and see how we can modify it by adding a base to it. So we click to the modify panel and then we choose the BaseFill module out of all the available modules. So again, as before, same page, some information about it. You can learn about the parameters in the module, in the modeling viewport, or you can actually click here on this learn documentation and that will send you to some specific documentation that describing each parameter in large detail. So a lot of information here should you need them. But let's see how the modeling happened. So this time, the first step is to import our previous design, the base we just modeled. So we import the boundary curves and we select the design we just downloaded. And once we import it, we will visualize in the viewport the first 5 layers of this design so that we can define or configure a base for it. So as before, we go full screen, and in order to better visualize what we need, we're gonna go on the pencil and go to the camera and select the top view. So that will make it easier for us. Then, as before, we move throughout these parameters at the top. So let's just disregard the first two which are not relevant for this tutorial and let's look into the parameters available for Brim. So this parameter you can use in order to create a Brim. But I would advise you use this parameter only if you need to solve some adhesion problem or you want somehow a wider base. If your intention is that of priming the extruder, we will see how you can do that later on in a later stage. So for now, I don't have any adhesion problem and I will not use this Brim. Next, we are gonna move into the base layer. So the first thing is to select the type. This is a concentric type and this is the contour type. Now, we are gonna work with the base mode later on, and the base mode has some limitation regarding the base. It can only be concentric and it can only be up to 2-layer base. So no more than 2-layer concentric. Now that we selected the concentric base, let's define the most important parameter. That is the path spacing here. So the path spacing is nothing more than the distance in between extrusion line. See? I just want to point out that this does not affect the flow. So the computation for your flow, your plastic flow or clay flow, whatever you're printing, is going to be done in the latter module when you prepare the G-code. Right now, you just really define the position of the nozzle. So for example, in my case, I use a 1.2 nozzle. I usually define an extrusion which is about 1.4. So I know as a fact from experience that the spacing of 1.3 really works best in my scenario. You may need some experimentation on your machine to find the correct spacing, but like the extrusion, the nozzle size or the width of the extrusion is always a good point to start. Then we can select the number of base layer. So I'm gonna add 2. And you can actually see if you switch back in perspective, we now have, see, 2 layers of our base back to the top. And now there is another important parameter, which is this infill perimeter overlap. So I will just focus on the first layer, right, in order to explain it properly. This is basically just the amount of overlap you want in between your boundary in blue and your infill. So if you set it to 0, you will have a distance from infill and boundary which is equal to the spacing you set, but you can go up to 1 and then you will have complete overlap. This is because according to your material setup or whatever your machine does, you may have different requirements, and sometimes, especially if you print clay, I know having a closed, nice, smooth base is very important, so hopefully this can help. In my specific case, 0.2 usually works quite well. One last thing I want you to say, so we're doing a concentric mode, and we saw about what the spacing is and why it's important, but within the concentric mode, you have actually two ways of building this spiral base layer. One, the one we used, is accurate, and this means that the path spacing is always respected. It's constant, exactly at the value you set. You can, however, switch to the loose kind of infill, which creates a smoother spiral that goes from the outside shape to a circle in the center. And in this case, the spacing is more like an approximative guideline. So it's not really strictly 1.3. It's gonna change. It's narrower here, it's wider here, which can be useful maybe if you're printing PLA and looking for some fancy light patterns, but it's totally a problem if you're trying to achieve a closed vessel or something waterproof. So in that case, I recommend you use accurate. So now I will stick to the accurate. I set all the parameters. I have this XY resolution, which normally I keep always as low as I can. So if I don't see nothing wrong here with my design, I don't change it. Pentabase, so I give a name to my file, and as before, now that I finalized my base design, I will just download it, and then I can download the DXF containing this line work. Here I go, and this step is over. So stay focused on the next step. In the next step, we're gonna see in detail how to create the G code. So for now, this is all, and thank you for your attention.